I want to say hello to everyone who is attending and to all of our panelists who are taking the time out of their very busy lives to be here today. I'm just really thrilled to welcome you all to this panel of fantastic women leaders from across UCSF in celebration of International Women's Day. My name is Sarah Goglin, and I'm an associate professor of medicine at UCSF in the Division of Rheumatology. And along with Dr. Rupal Shah, who is also an associate professor of medicine at UCSF in the Division of Pulmonology and Critical Care, lead the Department of Medicine Women's Group. And we were inspired to put this panel together by two wonderful leaders in our department, Dr. Urmimala Sarkar and Dr. Meshell Johnson. So I'm going to start by introducing the two of them and then turning it over to them for a few minutes to talk with us about why we thought this topic was important to hear from all of you today. So Dr. Sarkar is a professor of medicine at UCSF in the Division of General Internal Medicine, the Associate Chair for Faculty Experience for the Department of Medicine, and the Associate Director of the UCSF Center for Vulnerable Populations. Dr. Meshell Johnson is also a professor of medicine at UCSF in the Division of Pulmonary Critical Care, and she holds multiple leadership roles, including being the Chief of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine at the San Francisco VA, as well as the Associate Chair for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Department of Medicine. So thank you, Dr. Sarkar and Johnson, for being here, and I'll turn it over to you for an introduction.
Meshell, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Yes. Oh my goodness. So thank you so very much for inviting us. I think that that this is something that that Urmimala and I have talked a lot about because we feel that there's so much just hope and potential and opportunity that's out there for everyone to take hold of, but we really want to make sure that our women, especially our women faculty members, seize upon these opportunities, because I think that a lot of times we don't do as much grabbing as we should. And so I'm here to say that that grabbing is good, and some of the things that I really wanted to share have to do more with realizing that leadership is an opportunity for you to help elevate others, and that there is a difference in being able to, I think, persuade people and leverage the ability to urge people to do certain things, but then there's the part where being a leader actually lets you take action and tend to make things happen. So influence versus action are two things that I think we're often faced with, and I would say that that while both sound very appealing, I think I would go for action, and that is why I think it's important to encourage women to take on these leadership roles, because then they can actually put all of the wonderful things that they have in terms of plans and visions and missions and support for the people that they care about forward, so that we can make the women that are around us, that support us, and that work with us as successful as they want to be. So those are my thoughts. Urmimala?
I'm so honored to be among this group of amazing women leaders. Thank you for having me. I have been thinking about this because I've been involved in search committees and a number of sort of leadership application processes recently, and they've given me some reflections that are just general statements based on kind of overall impressions of how women versus non-women faculty think about these things. So I have a few kind of general points of advice to give, and I'm really interested to see where our panelists take this. So the first perspective I have is it's good to fail. I don't know anybody who's gotten the first leadership role they've applied for. And as we know, women are sort of socialized to be not to tolerate failure so much. And that's something that we really need to get past. I will tell you, I've applied for a lot more leadership roles than I've actually gotten. And I think that's the case even for many of our esteemed panelists today. The second thing is don't wait to be asked. There are multiple studies that demonstrate that women are less likely to apply for leadership roles unless someone reaches out to them. I don't think that's actually, you don't want to put your career, your future, your plans in the hands of somebody who's going to think to ask you or not. So don't wait to be asked. Really know that that's something that's common to women that you don't have to be subject to. And I'll just admit that the first leadership role I applied to, it was really because I ran into someone I really respected who stopped me and insisted on telling me all about this role. And it had never occurred to me that I might be a candidate. That's very common, but we have to stop that. The third point is that you are more qualified than you think. Women in the search committees that I've been on are often quite self-deprecating and often feel almost a little bit sheepish about putting themselves out there. I am here to tell you that I promise you, you will not be the least qualified person who applies. And I'm just going to leave that there. Okay. Couple of other things. Even when you fail, you get other opportunities from applying to leadership roles. And I have some of the roles that I have now come from not getting other things I applied to. And it's been really useful to have people think of me differently and know me better because I applied for those roles. So even if you don't get them, it often turns into a success. And then finally, don't wait for a perfect fit. I now, one of the things I have to do is reach out to women and ask them to apply for a role. And they'll often say to me, but I don't like this about the job. I don't like that about the job. And what I have to say is, if you're offered the job, you can tailor it. You can make it work for you in many cases. So I would not be put off if there are things about the job that don't seem perfect. Probably the job that you have now is not perfect either. So please just be willing to put yourself out there and give it a shot, even if it doesn't seem like a match made in heaven. So I'll leave it there and turn it back over to Rupal and Sarah.
Thank you so much, Meshell and Urmimala. Such great wisdom there already to kick us off. I'm now going to turn to our amazing group of panelists who really represent a very diverse group of types of leadership roles and backgrounds. So to start, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves. Tell us what your leadership role is currently, and then if you could discuss your very first leadership position and what inspired you to apply to that. I have an order that I'm going to put in the chat for you, but I'll also facilitate that. And then as a reminder before we start, if you have questions in the audience, please use the Q&A function. We really want you all to be able to pick these amazing leaders' brains as well and to make this as impactful for you. Thank you so much for attending. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy Liu to kick us off.
Great. Rupal, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy Liu. I'm the Chief Quality Officer here at UCSF Health. I'm also the professor of anesthesiology and perioperative care here. I went to medical school here about 26 years ago, and I started in this role about a year ago. And it was kind of a dream for me to come back to a place that had all my formative influences, as a medical student, and with its core mission, as we know, with health equity at its center, doing something that I love, which is quality and safety. So I was listening to Urmimala's very wise comments earlier. I also just I echo everything that she said, and I couldn't have said it better. I would also add that just pursue what you love, because the journey is challenging. It won't be easy, and what will keep us going is doing what we love. And it doesn't have to be 100% of the time, as Urmimala said, right? But it needs to be what we're passionate about and what we have purpose in. And then just with respect to my first leadership opportunity, so after medical school, I had gotten an MPH. I took 2 years off of med school to get an MPH in Boston. I spent a year at the NIH, and then I ended up doing residency at MGH in Boston anesthesia, and started a lot of the quality and safety work there. And when I got my first job in New York City, right after residency, I was at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. They needed a quality director. And so I applied for that. And it was really the background of public health and then the work I had done with community health organizations during medical school that I think may have helped, in that role, getting that position. So thanks. I'll pass it off. Who's next?
I think I am.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Grandis. I'm a professor of otolaryngology, head and neck surgery here at UCSF. I came to UCSF in 2015 for the first leadership role I actually applied to. Everything else had been kind of cultivated at the University of Pittsburgh, where I grew up, from medical student to big girl. And just relevant to what you just said, Urmimala, I was first a candidate for the cancer center director here. And for those of you who have been around long enough, Sam Hoggood, who was the dean of medicine, chaired that search. And at the end said, I'm going to pick Alan Ashworth for cancer center director, but there's this other job over here that I think you would be ideal for. And I guess at some level, it was a little bit of a bait and switch, but it really allowed me and, my husband, Don, who some of you know, he's a cardiologist here, to really get to know UCSF and really become convinced that it was a place that we really wanted to come to. So when I think of my first leadership role, it was, again, something I was plucked out of the audience, kind of like, Bruce Springsteen pulling the girl up onto the stage and doing a dance. And that's what happens when you grow up in a place. And it particularly is what happens when you're a unicorn. And as some of you probably can identify, I'm a woman, I'm a surgeon, I'm a scientist. That turns out to still be a fairly unusual phenotype to embody. And so the cancer center director, who was a beloved mentor, maybe now we'd call him a sponsor, he said, hey, I want you to lead a new program. And I had just been promoted. I'd just gotten tenure. My kids were 3 and 5. It seemed a little overwhelming to take on yet another job, but I was inspired because it was the first time it wasn't about me. And it was so exciting for it not to be about me and my own little CEO and building my own career. And as those of you who work within NCI designated comprehensive cancer centers, it was about pulling really diverse constituents, trainees and faculty together, all aligned with a common goal that I was really passionate about, translational cancer research. It was all about influence. I didn't have a lot of money to hand out, but it really prepared me for someday coming here and doing the big girl job. So thank you for having me.
I think I'm next. I'm Kathy Julian. I am Associate Dean for Graduate Medical Education. I'm also serving as one of the interim Vice Deans for Education, as Catherine Hsue has transitioned to her Vice Provost role. And I am a primary care internist and see patients in general medicine. So thank you for having me. This is really, really great. I agree with all the wisdom that has been shared thus far. I would say my very first academic leadership role was, since I'm in education, was interviewing for an associate program director role in the Department of Medicine many, many, many years ago. And I agree a lot with Urmimala. I think a lot of times people see leaders and think it's just been this amazing, direct, accelerated route to where they are, and nobody sees the many, many jobs that you have applied for and didn't get along the way. So I would say if I were going to impart advice, there's several pieces. One is, I would say, own your awesomeness, meaning, you really are awesome, and recognize that. I do think women tend to downplay a lot of their strengths, or really couch them in the fact that, we like to collaborate or work with others and don't always take credit for all the amazing things that we do. So I do think when you are going into applying for jobs, really think about all that you have accomplished and own that. And I would also say to be assertive in seeking out mentorship. I think it's, it's useful to have more than one mentor. I certainly have benefited also from near peer mentors, meaning people who were just a year or two ahead of me as well. And I would say be assertive in seeking that out. That has been incredibly helpful. I'll pass it on to Priscilla.
Great. So I'm Priscilla Hsue, and I'm super honored to be here with all these wonderful panelists. And I think similar to Kathy and others, I have been at UCSF since medical school. So it's kind of crazy, long time. And I think I've learned at all of these different points along this pathway in different ways. So I remember, choosing to go into cardiology, no sharp elbows there at all, no big egos. And at the time, I think just really feeling unsure of myself, kind of insecure. And I think the pathway has instilled like this huge, strong sense of desire for me to succeed. And by failing multiple times, I think you just really learn to believe in yourself. And I always tell my mentees, like, if you don't believe in yourself, then why will anyone? And so I think it has to come from within. And I so agree with Amy that doing what you love and have a passion for, you know, I've always heard the thing that academics is a full contact sport. And I totally agree. And I think, I do think with failure, you know, we do learn an incredible amount. And I remember, like, I think one of the first things I really failed at, I was feeling super down. And I remember this is such a great reflection of how I think men and women think differently. So I was confiding in my husband. I was like, I was not good enough and blah, blah, blah. And then he was like, you're wrong. They were just not ready for you. And I was like, wow, I never even thought that. And I was like, but that's how I should think. And so I think, you know, that was great. And it's kind of crazy because so I'm currently the chief of cardiology at Zuckerberg San Francisco General. And I remember as a trainee, when I was looking around, I never saw anyone who ever looked like me who was a chief of cardiology anywhere. And it's just kind of crazy. And I think, you know, yes, the job has had pros and cons, and it was kind of painful when I started. It's better now. But I think one of the amazing things is I've had multiple different medical students, residents, and fellows come up to me and say, you know, we've never seen someone like you be a chief of cardiology. And the fact that they could see me in this, they were like, you know, we can do this too. And they should be able to do a lot more. And so I think that's been very inspiring to me. So thank you. So I'll hand it over, I think, to Sharon.
Yes, thank you, Priscilla, and thank you, Rupal and Sarah. I am truly honored to be amongst this esteemed group of fabulous women leaders. Some of you I know, some of you I don't, and I feel honored and being, you know, maybe just a little bit different. In fact, I'm from the School of Pharmacy, so I feel proud to represent that, and I've had an opportunity to work with some of you. So I am a professor of clinical pharmacy. I currently serve as the executive vice dean for the School of Pharmacy. I've been in that role now for about 4 or 5 months. And I am a pharmacist by training. In fact, I'm a UCSF alum from 1985. I tell my students I was 12 when I graduated, so you can do the math. But it's been great. And actually, after I graduated, I went away for several years to work at various hospitals in the city, and then had the opportunity to come back to UCSF in the mid to late 1990s. But in reflecting on my first leadership role, it wasn't anything that I applied for, which has sort of been a theme in my life. I just had a fantastic female boss who saw something in me that I didn't necessarily see. And I was very, very young. I would say 29 is still kind of young. And she asked me to serve as to chair the task force for the department, because we were about to embark on a project of implementing physician order entry, computerized physician order entry. So this was back in 1989. And I think our hospital was probably one of the first in the city. And I didn't have a clue as to what I was doing, but she thought that I would be good at it and that I might be successful, because this was like round 2 and the first round wasn't successful. But there was also the person who was going to be the MD task force was someone that I highly respected. And she was a woman physician, ID specialist. And I thought, I might be able to do this. I think I can work with her. So I'll go ahead and take this on. And that's really where I sort of gained my experience. I said, hone my skills with interprofessional communication, dealing with the whole department. And to date, it's like one of the top projects that I'm just very, very proud of. And we flipped the switch in May of 1991 and held our breath, but it all worked out. So, I just learned so much and was so grateful for that experience. The comments that my colleagues have said about, you know, don't wait to be asked, don't wait to be invited to the party, crash the party, being clear about what you want, because no one's going to hand you anything. We usually are more qualified then we think. At least I've seen people less qualified apply for those same jobs. So I said, well, I wish I had their confidence. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to tick every box for whatever you want to do or the position that opens up. And I always encourage people to have an open heart and an open mind and just be ready. Said luck is for the prepared. Just be ready to step in. And it might be a little scary. And you said, oh, well, and I've been in a position where I saw a job posting and I said, oh, I don't want to do that. And then I had a mentor who kind of gave me an ear lashing and told me to apply for the job. So I did. That was the faculty position. And I got that. So it's been a wonderful career. And things have kind of, and sometimes fallen in my lap, and we don't have a whole lot of time today, but probably the biggest job that I applied for was recently for the Dean of the School of Pharmacy, and I was not selected, but I am so happy that I went through that process, and it'll be something that I'll never forget. And now I feel like, well, I can apply for anything. I can do it and survive. And it was pretty intense. And I jokingly said, I think I might have gotten a popular vote. I just didn't get the electoral college vote of 1. So that's okay. That's okay. But I'm very happy. And it had, and by going through that, it opened up other doors and other opportunities for me. So I'm really happy about that. So thank you again for inviting me to participate in this.
Great. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves and starting to share some of your experiences and your wisdom. Our second question that we have for all of you, we've already started to touch on several themes, so feel free to add if you have anything additional to say. But really the main question is, how do we get more women into leadership roles here at UCSF? And what additional advice would you give to young women who aspire to become leaders here? And I'll put the order for the question into the chat. Maybe we'll start with you, Jennifer, if you don't mind.
Oh, not at all. Thank you so much for this question. It's important. In addition to my own personal experiences, as some of you know, I did a qualitative study in 2019 where I traveled around the country and interviewed 54 men and 54 women at 16 different academic medical centers to understand the impact of gender on career development. And what I heard from these men and women blew my mind and coincided with so many of my experiences. So most importantly, systemic forces are needed for durable change. We can have heroes and we can have heroines, but once the hero or the heroine moves on without those systemic forces in place, things tend to revert. So serve on those important search committees. It's really important. In the School of Medicine, Talmadge put into place this rule. And I remember I was in my leadership position when he put it in, and there was so much pushback by the chairs of the departments, primarily the male chairs of small departments that had very few women on their faculty. And they really were concerned that their women faculty would be overburdened with these responsibilities. And luckily, Talmadge held fast. And there's really ample evidence that diverse search committees hire diverse people. So lean in, serve on those committees. You'll see how the sausage is made. And sometimes it's kind of eye-opening. And then don't forget your voice, meaning we are on these committees, and especially, I'll never forget when I was an associate professor and I was on the search committee for the chair of surgery. It was me and 5 men who were chairs. And I felt like it was like driving your kids around when they're teenagers and they forget that you're in the front of the car and you can actually hear the weird things they're saying. I mean, I would hear things from these men, and I heard things from the men I interviewed that you're like, you really think that way still? And the answer is yes, they do. And so it's really important that when someone says something, I'll give you an example. There was a finalist for a chair job, a woman and a man, and the male chair of the search committee commented that the woman just wasn't warm and fuzzy enough. And the person who shared the story with me was an associate professor and did not feel like she had the power to push back on this person who was her boss. And, we gave her strong feedback to use her voice. There would be no retaliation. There's so many respectful ways, ask someone to repeat what they just said and just say, gosh, this is what I think I hear you saying. And why is it important that the woman be warm and fuzzy? And we're not holding the men to the same level of, or the same kind of criteria. And I'm going to stop here, but just basically, women leaders are so vulnerable to walking a tightrope that's impossible. We're expected to be vulnerable, warm, fuzzy, decisive, firm. All you have to do is look at the language around Lori Lightfoot's recent loss in Chicago and recognize that the only other woman that lost a re-election in that city was a woman. These are pervasive issues, and we have to find our voices in the moment to challenge these this language, because it's otherwise going to get in our way. And I'll stop there. Thank you. And I will now pass it.
I think it's me. Yeah.
Yeah, Kathy, you.
I love that. I will say something similar, which is, and kind of riffing off of what Amy had said earlier, which is, do things that you love and say yes to opportunities like service or serving on a committee or something. That is not to say that you should do all service. Now, just to be very clear, because I also think women can have a tendency to do a lot of service and not always other things that can lead to things. But I think if, and that's where sometimes that near peer mentorship can really help, or other mentorship as well. But I do think if it's something you're interested in, and it is serving on this committee or some other piece, do that. It helps you meet other people. It does give you experience, and I think that that's useful. I guess the other piece along with that, as I was thinking about how we can help with more leaders is, or just for women who are interested in becoming leaders, is if someone's willing to invest in you to learn something, do something, say yes. And I'll give you an example, which is I had an opportunity years ago to do the Lean boot camp. Am I a patient safety quality improvement expert like Amy? No, absolutely not. But I said yes to that because it was something I thought, this is kind of cool. I'll do this. And honestly, it has really helped me even in my education role, really thinking about things on a systems level. How do I, take a step back and look at the big picture? And so if someone's willing to invest in you in terms of your skill set, say yes. And I will pass it on to Priscilla.
Yeah, I think Jenny and Kathy really have all the great advice. I'm trying to think if I have things additional to that. I do think mentorship, not just at UCSF, but around the country at different institutions, has been incredibly important. And sometimes, your boss can't be your mentor because they have a pony in the race. And so I think for me, it's been really helpful to have, someone who's maybe not in cardiology or maybe in a completely different place, give me advice on what I should do in a situation. And that has been incredibly helpful. And I think I've definitely, I think having a strong network of, female mentors who can help elevate you, for committees, national meetings, on panels, I think is incredibly important. I totally agree with what Jenny said about, being on panels or selection committees. That really gives you huge insight, I think, into what people are looking for when you get interviewed and when you're in the opposite seats. I found that, that experience to be very, very helpful as well. Yeah, so thank you. I think Sharon.
Yes, I'm up. So I agree with everything that's been said. The one thing in pharmacy is that traditionally, like, our classes are mostly female. When I started as a faculty member, the faculty were more female, but the positions of leadership were held by men. And so now that trajectory has changed, and I am proud to say, at least as of today at 4:30 p.m., that the School of Pharmacy now is run by women. Our new dean is a woman. All 3 department chairs are women, and she has a large leadership team, but which is nicely balanced, but a lot of them are women. And so leading by example and really when you're in a position to make those decisions and make those appointments, to really follow through on that. So kind of putting your money where your mouth is. So we have very strong women leadership in the school, which should be an example for our students and also for our faculty. Even today and recently, to strongly encourage people to take positions. They're great, they're busy, they're doing wonderful things, but some people still need a little nudge to say, take advantage of this opportunity. And I was very honest with someone. I said, this may not come your way again. I said, take it, do it for a year. If you don't like it, you can step away from it. But you don't want to be in a situation where shoulda, woulda, coulda. Even if it's not like, and you might have to let go of something in order to do it. But if it's a step up, you should do it. And one of my mantras is that as I climb, I try to lift. Whether it's directly to sponsor someone in a position or to serve as an example or to encourage, I will do all that. And the more we have, I mean, I do believe that one day the world will be run by women and we will have no wars. I'm just totally convinced of that, because that's just not how we operate. But we still have a ways to go. And I even look at our pharmacy academy, it's 50-50, but as you go up the ranks, the higher ranks, you see more men. So that'll just be a generational thing that'll have to die out. But there are more women deans across the country. And it's not so much about one is better than the other, it's just that our time is due. And there are some things we do better. And that's okay. So I'm really excited about that. And I will do all I can to advise and help people and nudge them if they need to a little bit. And then you can step back and say, no, this wasn't really right for me. And that's okay. It doesn't have to last forever. You don't have to do any one thing forever. You can apply for a job and get it. And 2 years later said, this is not for me. And that is okay. Thank you.
Great. I think I'm next. Okay. So I would say everything that's been said before by the panelists, I agree with. I especially liked what Sharon just said in terms of lifting as we're in our leadership roles. I firmly believe in that. And it's a lot of it has to do with what Priscilla mentioned earlier in her role, which is that there are not that many people that look like her in her role. And there's not that many people that look like me in the role that I have. And I can count on less than, on one hand, less than one hand, the number of people that look like me that hold this position around the United States. And so I have each day, even when the day isn't necessarily easy or straightforward, I feel fortunate to be in a place where we can make an impact just by, being in this role. And I've had medical students and other students from around UCSF reach out and say, you know what, I've not seen anyone else who looks like you. And I want to, work on something similar, like after graduation. How do I do that? That connection. I think also in terms of advice to the young women who aspire to be leaders here at UCSF, it goes back to what we said earlier, which is just apply. If something looks interesting, apply, you'll learn from it. And then as you're moving through your career and your lives, embrace each other and build that network and find that community. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Oh, just one thing I think we forgot to say, and this is the scary part, is sometimes you need to leave. I mean, it's really a pyramid. There are more talented and ambitious women at UCSF than there are authentic leadership positions. And having held boutique leadership positions, that is titles without budgets and influence, it's not the same as being the real person in charge. And having, moved, after my kids were grown, it was really, really hard for me to imagine doing that while they were still in school. It was the scariest thing I ever did, but my family couldn't be happier here. My daughter ended up coming to medical school here. Our son moved to San Francisco, and it's been just wonderful for my family. But it was hard, but I was not credible as a leader in the place where I'd been a baby medical student. And so sometimes we just have to go somewhere else.
Thanks for that important, as someone who also moved, I think that's an important thing to consider. We are now getting questions from the audience, which is great. We're going to switch off asking you questions from the audience. I won't expect every panelist to answer every question, but if there's a question that resonates with you, please raise your hand and we'll get your input. The first question I'm going to ask is, how do you balance leadership roles or demands with having a family? And I'll expand that to personal life or things outside of work, because I think that's always kind of daunting when we think about these leadership positions. Kathy, go ahead.
I'll take a stab at that. I have 3 kids, although I'm now an empty nester. And I will just say, you know, my career has changed over time. When my kids were little, I actually worked part-time. I didn't work full-time. And I think that is honestly, depending on your track, I recognize that can be the beauty of academic medicine, is a little more flexibility. I absolutely prioritized my kids when they were young, and I have no regrets whatsoever about that, honestly. At the end of the day, God forbid, when you're on your way to the grave, you're probably not going to be like, God, I wish I had worked more. I wish I had applied for more jobs, you know? So I think it's okay to prioritize young kids. And so I have no regrets about that.
Mala?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say, I think my perspective on that has changed a little bit. And just, I have 2 kids. They're still in my house. And I think that when they went from like baby plus toddler to kind of middle grade kids, I thought like, okay, this is feeling a little bit more doable. And that's when I started applying for leadership roles. And now I have 2 teenagers, and it really feels like a massive step back in terms of the time and energy required to be a parent. And then, by the way, there is a real sandwich phenomenon of aging parents and children in the house that is very real. And I'm watching women who are a few years ahead of me have as many unanticipated absences because they're caring for elders as I do early career women who are having unanticipated absences because of sick kids. So I'm going to say, if you have young kids and a full life and you want these things, let's think about how can we be resourceful at home and at work and make them happen. We have structures in society and in our workplaces that we need to fix. Right? We all need better clinical coverage systems so that when we have an unanticipated absence, it's not the end of the world for ourselves and our colleagues. And we all need more equitable parenting and domestic structures at home. So I think we can kind of collectively think outside our nuclear family box and think outside our kind of individual work responsibility box and try to restructure and make it possible to do both, rather than thinking there's some indefinable point in the future where things are going to get better, because I don't think they are.
Just one point I want to raise from this study that was so striking to me when if you will, the leaky pipeline is a well-known phenomenon. I personally think it's more of a flushing. But when I asked the men, why they had so few women who were advancing, through their careers to leadership positions, almost everybody gave the explanation, well, they have families, they get distracted. It was essentially a uniform belief that women prioritized family over career. There wasn't a single woman who I interviewed who blamed her lack of career advancement on their family. And I don't think any of us here are saying that. If we have more responsibilities at certain times in our children's lives and our parents' lives, well, that's on us and our partner or our partners to figure that out. But our children are not the reason why we don't advance. And this is sort of like the lean in phenomenon. It's not our fault, and it's not a barrier to leadership or advancement, even though the prevailing hypothesis is that's what we're picking.
Great. Thank you all for those perspectives. The next question I'm going to ask is related to mentorship, sponsorship, and coaching, because this has come up from multiple members of our audience. So wondering if any of you can share how women can effectively find a mentor or a sponsor. How can departments and organizations work together to create environments where finding these people is easier, and so there are structures to get connected with those individuals? and also interested to hear if anyone has any experience with leadership coaching as a kind of side item to this, and if you think that that is a helpful tool for women who are interested in leadership positions to pursue.
I'm happy to start.
Oh, go for it, Sharon.
So in terms of the mentorship, it's critically important, both the formal and the informal kind of mentoring. And I always encourage people to look outside your box. So I've had mentors from the School of Nursing, School of Medicine that have been invaluable to me, because those are people you can really talk to, and there's no political kind of consequence, and you can just be truthful and honest about what's going on in your life. If in your departments, hopefully we all now have some kind of formal mentoring program. And if your department doesn't, then I would suggest that you demand and ask for it, because the literature is strong with how mentoring is important for people's belonging and sticking around for a significant amount of time. And so your department might assign you a mentor, but don't be shy to go out and find your own as well, because sometimes that can be a tricky match. Be willing to, when new faculty come or hired in your department or in your school, to not be afraid to reach out. It's not like you have to commit to anything, but I think just reaching out and letting people know that I'm here. Because when I first became a faculty member, we didn't have that many women leaders. And one of the women, I kept waiting and waiting and waiting for her to call me. And so finally I called her, I think because I was a little bit older. So I called her and I said, why haven't you called me? Why haven't you invited me out for a coffee? You need to give me the 411 about what's going on here. So don't be shy about doing that. And she goes, oh, well, I didn't think it was appropriate. I said, what are you talking about appropriate? You're the only person I can really go to. So we shouldn't be shy about that. And like, again, don't wait for someone to hand it to you. If you need it and want it, and we all need it and we all want it, that there should be different strategies to go about getting it. And I think at UCSF, people are more than willing to help and to answer questions and to be a confidant if that's what you need, to help you with your professional growth. Thank you.
I will just add, I have a coach. I call it my work therapist. Honestly, Stefan, I found it really useful. I don't know if others do. I see others with their hands up.
Amy, you go first.
Oh, sure. I was going to say, just to follow what Sharon mentioned earlier, that it's important for women to understand the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. And that earlier on in my career, I had more mentors, and after a while, they turned more into sponsors, and that these people will change over time as well. I also really like what Sharon mentioned in terms of going outside of what we traditionally think of as our career box or our particular discipline or specialty. We'll learn a lot that way in terms of diversity of thought and other pathways. And then finally, when we talk about coaching, I think the idea of having some sort of formal coach typically comes to mind, but don't underestimate the power of peer coaching, because right now I'm finding that as we were just talking about family, and we have 2 kids. My husband's a faculty member at UCSF, and just in terms of just the peer coaching that comes from other women faculty, right, and other women leaders is really immeasurable.
I totally agree, Amy. And, I think that I still believe this mantra, the best way to make a friend is ask them for help. And I think all of us would be honored if any of you want to reach out and ask us for help. We're really good at that. We're good at listening. We're good at keeping confidence. And I feel this way about almost anybody really in the world. It's surprising how people will respond to you if you ask them for their help and advice. And I didn't even understand what coaching was until I got here. And it took me about a year to really get enough experience under my belt to make use of a coach. And it was formal. It was through Sunita Mutha's really outstanding space at the dental school, the Health Force Center, just like friends, partners, therapists. You got to interview a bunch of coaches. They're all different. You really have to click. You really have to feel like this person's style really resonates for you. And my coach oversaw a formal 360, which was eye-opening. I can't believe it took me 55 years on this planet to understand how other people saw me, but it was really, really helpful. And then, repeated it a year later to really understand if I had addressed some of the deficiencies that were identified. And Kim Rathmel, who is the chair of medicine at Vanderbilt, has written a wonderful article with her coach about coaching in academic medicine. There's some places that this is sort of required part of the onboarding process. It surprises me that we don't ask for this more often. And I wish we all had the insight and the ability as we come into new leadership positions anywhere to ask for coaching as part of that process. And you'll know when you're ready for it. It's really, really helpful.
Thank you all for those reflections. I'm going to transition to a different question, which some of you alluded to, which is how do you deal with failure? There's a couple of questions in the chat about applying for leadership positions and not being successful. And I think failure is extremely difficult to regroup from. And then if you have multiple failures, it can be really discouraging. So I'd love to hear from all of you how you have sort of mitigated the feelings around failure and persisted.
I definitely have applied for things I have not gotten. I would say one is if you can get feedback, that's always helpful. In case there was, I don't know, some way you presented yourself or what have you, if you can do that, I think that's useful. Sometimes it's hard in the moment because it stings not getting whatever you were applying for, but I do think the feedback is really useful. I think if it's that, you're applying for opportunities, you haven't gotten them yet, are there other opportunities you can pursue, like we talked about, like volunteering for, committees or going into your specialty organizations and, doing volunteerism there. Sometimes there's leadership opportunities there. There could be leadership opportunities, depending on what your area is, to do scholarship with others outside your institution. So there could be lots of other things that you could potentially pursue to at least get some of that experience.
I agree with what Kathy has said. It's really hard because usually if you don't get a job, it's not because you were necessarily a bad candidate. It just may be that things didn't line up. And I don't claim to see in a crystal ball, but I am a believer that certain things turn out for a reason. We just may not understand it, and we may never understand it on what I call this side of the grave. But hopefully there's some learning and reflection that comes out of it, and it's okay to be disappointed. I think that's the human part of us, but then how can we take that and turn that into something positive, and to get help to turn that into something positive, not necessarily that you have to, find the solution on your own. But the failure should, and this will be my last point, the failure should never be enough to stop you from trying. You have to keep on trying. Like I said, sometimes the opportunities will turn into something else. But our society doesn't deal with failure much. We are pressured, especially in an academic setting, that you can't fail. That's just unacceptable. And we're trying to turn that around, but still it weighs heavy on us. And I see it with our students when they apply for residency, they didn't match. Well, it doesn't mean you weren't a good candidate. It's just the math didn't line up for you. So how can you take that and move forward, and making sure that you have a good support system around you so that you can process that when you don't get it. And sometimes it might be a blessing in disguise sometimes, because I think all of us are talented enough, and we've had some ups and downs, but eventually it sort of was the springboard to the next opportunity or the next position. Thank you.
I would just push back a little on the word failure. I mean, I think failure is so laden with a sense of we did something wrong. I think it's really important to take these experiences, these really disappointing experiences, seriously, but not personally. I mean, these people we work for are not our parents. and we're such people pleasers in so many ways that we get confused. So I want to make sure that we separate out whatever we need to work on in our personal life with our therapist or our coach from what we really is appropriate for the workplace. And for those of us who write grants for a living, we don't really learn when we're successful. It's really those summary statements where we don't get our grant, where we're like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. So lean into the hard times, if you can handle it ego-wise, and you will grow. I have never grown when I've been successful. It's only when I've failed that I've become a better version of myself.
Yeah, just want to totally add upon what Jenny just said. And so I try to get a major grant every year. And how I do that is basically applying for every single cycle, which is like tons of failure. And I think it's actually really great for me because I learned so much from that failure. And I think one of the adjectives I try to use, I think, for a career in academics and research or whatever, you have to be resilient. You just have to, it's like, I remember the first time my grant was triaged, I think, it was my K award or something. I was in total depression. Now I'm just like, whatever. And you readjust, you pivot, you change it, you submit it to a different study section. So it's really how you learn and react to the failure, I think, that elevates us. And I think it's also made me somewhat of an optimist. And so, like, yes, when you don't do well on something, it sucks and it stings in the moment. But I think if you have a passion for what you're doing and a joy, good science and that joy will always lift you to the top. And so I think that for me, I think carries me through the tough times.
Thank you all. I think, Priscilla, what you just said is a nice segue into the next question that we were going to ask, focusing on thinking about burnout and resiliency. So obviously burnout is a huge epidemic in healthcare that seems to only be getting worse. And in many places it's worse for women and for people that have multiple minoritized identities. So would love to hear from anyone who feels comfortable sharing how you deal with burnout in yourself, in your leadership roles, or with people that are working with you as collaborators or junior faculty members.
Well, I'll start. I'll quickly say that I think the thing that slowed me down was the pandemic. I did not realize what I was doing pre-pandemic until I had to stay home and couldn't be around people as often as I had been. So I promised myself I was not going to go back to my pre-COVID life, whatever that was going to be, which meant that I was going to have to be more intentional about my time. Because it's easy to get sucked up. I mean, because we want to be everything to everybody. You need me, just come to my office. My calendar looked horrendous. And I just said, moving forward, I'm not doing that anymore. And it's hard. And maybe because I'm a little bit older, I can do it. And, my career is not coming to an end, but I've had a nice long career for over many decades. But the time that we have now is precious. So it's putting into priorities, what do I need to do versus what would be nice to do, which is, well, that's a fantasy. I'm not going to be able to do it. So maybe first is recognizing it, because I think when we get caught up in it, we don't realize what we're doing. And then saying, and maybe we just have to do some checks every 6 months, every year, or whatever. So what am I doing? Looking at my schedule, what can I take off my plate? And even our department chairs would having them help us take stuff off our plate, because if you're successful and you're really good at it, they just keep piling on, because they'll come to you, Sarah, because they'll know you get it done. But they're not taking anything away from you. And one of my favorite lines is that, well, if you want me to do this, then what can you take away so I can do it? Because I can't keep piling on things. So the burnout is real, and the impact of the pandemic is real, and how we've experienced, even though we were away and now we're trying to come back. And so how do we try to be more intentional with our lives, with our time, and with the people that we interact with? I found that, yes, I saw you every day, but actually seeing you maybe 2-3 times a week I appreciate that even more. than feeling that I have to see you every day. So that's sort of what I learned and what I walked away, but it took me all this long time to kind of realize it and to make space for new things to come in. If we're so, full of our regular stuff, there's no room for something new and different and exciting to kind of come in. And we have to be intentional about that. Sort of like spring cleaning. Okay, I'm taking this off the docket so that I could have space for something new. So thank you.
Mala?
I have a real concrete suggestion about how to manage burnout in yourself. And it really goes well with what Sharon said about being intentional. Track your time for a week. Literally write down where all of your time is going and look at what you're doing. And I think a lot of burnout comes when our time doesn't align with our values and our priorities. So once you've really been concrete about where your hours are going, it becomes much easier to take the steps that you need to take to align your time with your priorities. And then even if you're busy, you'll feel less burned out. And the other thing to remember is that you have a lot more agency than you think you do. You can go to the people who you work for, who you have responsibilities to, and say, this is how I'm spending my time. This is why it doesn't align with my priorities. How can we work on this together so that I will feel more satisfaction in my work and less burnout? And I encourage all of you, the chiefs can pillory me if they want to. I encourage all of you, if that's how you're feeling, to have that conversation with your chief or chair.
Love that. Meshell?
I just wanted to add to every wonderful thing that's already been said is that you are important enough to prioritize yourself. And so taking care of yourself. And one of the things that I've done is that I have decided that if there's one thing that I want to do, then I will do it when I want to during the week, because then that gives me power over my time, lets me know that I'm important, and brings me just a little bit of joy, even if it's for, that certain small amount of time per week. And I think that's what helps sustains me in this craziness that we're doing. And I just would empower all of you to prioritize yourselves.
Any last comments? We're almost at time. Okay, I appreciate ending on that message of prioritizing ourselves and remembering kind of the control that we can have, because I think sometimes that gets lost in all the expectations that we have from ourselves and people around us. I just want to send a heartfelt thank you to all of our panelists and to Meshell and Mala, who supported us with this panel and this great idea. I'm already receiving lots of messages about how impactful this has been, and I feel like we could have a conversation all evening covering many more topics. But unfortunately, we're at time, so I want to thank you all so much for your attendance. Thank you to those of you who joined. And I'll just repeat the offer that we are all available for mentorship, sponsorship, coaching, or we can connect you with others who may be helpful. We want to be resources for you here at UCSF. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.